Hi there, this is Jonathan Ginsberg, and I want to talk to you if you are applying for disability and you have a mental health condition such as depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, where perhaps you hear voices or see things that aren't there, and the genesis of your mental health issues are some long ago trauma, childhood sexual or physical abuse, teenage abuse, perhaps you were abused while in the military or as a young adult, but things that may explain some of the symptoms you're experiencing. And what I have found to be a very effective technique in presenting these cases to Social Security judges is not so much to focus on the symptoms you're experiencing, which I think are important, and you need to talk about that, but to really make sure that the judge knows and that Social Security knows the origins of your problem. Because I think that judges especially recognize that if you have gone through horrific abuse as a young person or as a teenager, that sometimes your experiences will manifest themselves, the symptoms will come out years later in the form of audio hallucinations or visual hallucinations. And I think it's really important to let Social Security, let a judge know, the adjudicator know the basis of what's going on. So for example, I had a case just recently with a client of mine who hears voices, sees things, and it makes it very difficult for her to function, and in fact, makes it very difficult for her to work because these voices are very intrusive. They talk to her, tell her to do things, and keeps her from focusing on tasks that would allow her to perform a job. And when you talk to her, however, even though she's got these voices, she's kind of used to it. This is something she lives with on a day-to-day basis. So really in her life, it's not something that is out of the norm. So she's learned to kind of deal with it. I mean, they are intrusive, but most of the time she's able to kind of do day-to-day activities and so forth. And of course, there are some times when they become very, very intrusive and makes it very hard for her to do anything. But when you talk to her, especially when she was, trying to make a special effort to be cooperative with me during our pre-hearing conference and during our meetings, we had very, very normal conversations. I mean, she explained about her symptoms, but again, it wasn't like you could sort of look at her and see that she was having trouble focusing on the issues at hand. But when I talked to her more, she gave me this long history of being physically abused as a young child and sexually abused by a parent. And then she was gang raped later on, and she was homeless and lived on the streets, and she got involved in drugs, and she was into a couple of marriages, and just on and on and on. She had years of drug abuse and alcoholism and so forth, and really never had any money to deal with some of these issues. And so she basically is this very damaged person. But again, if you talk to her, you wouldn't necessarily see that. So during our hearing, I had her talk about her symptoms a little bit, but then I spent most of the time during the hearing going through this long history, and I had to, I had to sort of control the testimony because she would sometimes get a little bit off topic. But nevertheless, she did a really good job explaining what she had gone through, and I could see the judge was starting to understand, okay, this makes sense why she's having these symptoms. And really by the end of the hearing, which again was about 30, 40 minutes of this testimony, the judge had pretty much convinced himself that he understood what she was going through, and he decided to approve this case. And this is a judge, by the way, that doesn't approve a lot of cases. But I think he found her very credible, very believable, that she was telling the truth, about her staying off drugs and alcohol, and that what she had gone through, there was really no subterfuge. She was clearly being honest. And so the judge pretty much convinced himself and is going to approve the case. And I've used this technique in a number of cases involving clients who are dealing with hallucinations and other type of distractions. For them, it's a normal part of their day-to-day existence, but it's obviously something that would prohibit any kind of competitive work, because there are times when the hallucinations just get overbearing. There's medication which has side effects and so forth. But the point I'm making is that when you present your case to Social Security, and hopefully with an attorney, or even when you're dealing with the administrative levels, don't hesitate to give some history. And even if they say we don't necessarily need all that history, give it anyway. You want to put that on the record to make sure that Social Security, that somebody understands what you've gone through and why, so that when you actually do get in front of a judge and he's trying to figure out, do I believe that these symptoms are at the level he or she is saying that they are, then you've got this long history to say, yes, this is what's going on. And by the same token, when you're talking to your doctors, give this history, write it down. Make sure that this is part of your record. And that's what, again, an attorney will do, is to make sure this is part of the record in the form of a brief or in the form of a memo to the judge. But it's really important to give history, and probably more so than in any other kind of case, because I know in physical cases, when somebody's had, let's say, knee problems, and it goes back to playing football in high school or falling off a truck 30 years ago, judges don't necessarily want to hear that, because they say, well, that's something you were able to get past and work for 20 years. So I'm really more focused on what's going on in the last 4 or 5 years since you claim you became disabled. When you're dealing with mental health issues, when there's this trauma background, it's very, very conceivable and likely that the trauma may not fully reveal itself for many, many years, 15, 20, 30 years even. So that's what I try to do, is to make sure that's on the record. That's what I encourage you to do as well. So that's kind of a strategy that I use when I'm dealing with emotional trauma, physical trauma that typically in the form of abuse that happened many years ago. And again, I find it to be a very convincing technique in presenting cases to hearings, and I encourage you to think about using it as well. I hope this has been helpful for you. Again, my name is Jonathan Ginsberg. Any questions you've got, please feel free to let me know. Thank you very much.